Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to Life on Side B, where we talk about queer things. I need a better introduction to this podcast than that, but better than our long first introduction that we did in season 1. But anyway, welcome back.
Let's say it's like you used to have a really long thing.
I felt like at the beginning we really needed an explanation. And then I felt like at this point, you probably already know what we're talking about at this point.
Well, I mean, they know, but I mean, I don't think some new listeners, I don't think they always start in season 1. They'll probably listen to a few episodes in the current season, figure out if they like it, and then go back.
This is true. So for anyone listening for the first time, welcome to Life on Side B podcast, where we talk about what it's like to live according to the traditional sexual ethic of Christianity as LGBT and same-sex attracted Christians. If you're here for the first time, you don't know what this is, that is what this is. And we have Ashley returning. Hello.
Hello.
How does it feel to be back after having a baby?
Good. It feels, it went by faster than I thought. And I mean, I really did miss it. Like, I remember I watched the, once I got back from the hospital, because we were there for a week and that was longer than anticipated. I listened to like our Christmas episode that we had planned to record, like when I had the baby, and it was like, nope, that didn't happen. But I've been listening to the episodes, and it went by faster than I thought it would. So yeah, it wasn't like
it really did go by a lot fast. I know, I can't believe it. It's a year since like the pandemic began.
Yeah, like this is probably more or less when the episode came out before the quarantine, because like next week's like a year since quarantine. I think what it is so for everyone, we've been talking about I hope I'm not going to promise that it's going to happen, but it looks like it's going to happen. We're going to do a 1 year anniversary of the Side B on Life During Corona episode, and we were talking about it, and I actually looked. The episode actually came out March 31st, but we recorded it a lot earlier than that. That's what I was trying to figure out, because I looked on the my podcast app to see when that episode came out. I think it said the 29th, but it was somewhere around
29th. Yeah,
it was somewhere around there. But I know we had recorded it before because you added a lot to it. You edited that one a lot and everything.
Yeah,
but I don't
one
know
I
when
took
we recorded it.
Weeks editing. I took quite a bit of time, but yeah, I think it was around now when we recorded our part.
But that episode came out after quarantine started. Like I said, quarantine started like the week of the 17th, so it wasn't now. You just had a lot of time on your hands and it felt longer.
This is probably true. This is probably true that
you took a few days, but you didn't take weeks.
Oh, I felt like it was weeks, but who knows?
Maybe a
week.
week.
My goodness, yeah. Well, how does it feel to be a mother? That's another question I have for you.
It's got a learning curve to it. Like I think I've mentioned before that I come from a large family. I'm the oldest of 9, so the basics of like changing diapers and not panicking and they'll eventually go to sleep. Like, stuff like that. Everybody's like, it's different when it's your kids. I'm like, poop is poop.
Amen.
That doesn't change much. It changes when it's like, they keep putting your kid back in an incubator. And it's like, eh.
Yeah.
And I hope he's all right and everything. So, I mean, the first few weeks, because it was like he wasn't preemie, but he was 2 weeks early. So, it's like, it's not preemie, he's full term. He was full size, but they still had stuff that we had to, like, look into. And it was a few weeks of that. So, it was kind of intense and tiring, but after that we've gone into our own little routine, if you want to call it that. Like it's just he decides how the day is going to go. That's pretty much how that is right now.
He is the master of the house.
Oh yes, but it's fun
100%.
and I love it, and he's adorable, and he's great. Like we love it.
Well, we're excited to have another mascot of the podcast. You know, him, Becca's kids. We have plenty.
Yeah,
of
I was thinking that. I was like, we actually now have 3 little Life on Side B Children's.
Exactly. Little youngins. Great. Well, anyone that's on YouTube, you might notice, hey, there's no video here. Yeah, so I will just like kind of say that, not all of our co-host team is out, and not only that, but we also at times may not have guests that are completely out. So at times on this season, we'll have times when there's video, other times when there's not. So this episode is just going to be audio today. But this is our first episode that we have done, that we're doing, I guess. That the topic was picked by our patrons. We have an option for our Brilliant Bee patrons to pick topics for episodes, and this is the first one that was chosen. The topic for today is the topic of the potential power and harm of our stories. A very interesting topic to think about. How do our stories affect people? How do our stories help the church, hurt the church, help the LGBT community, hurt the LGBT community? What does that look like? What can we do to change that, to negate that, to amplify the blessings the way it helps? All of those things. So that's what we're going to talk about. And I'm really, really glad that we have it's Ashley and I here, because I think one of the really nice things about this is that Ashley's story and mine kind of, I feel like in between ours on this topic, your and my stories kind of highlight some of the different ways that our stories can be both powerful and potential harm, like in the sense of celibacy and mixed orientation marriage, or like all these different kinds of things.
Oh yeah, I feel like mine's the dangerous one.
Not necessarily. And see, that's where I can't wait for us to get into. We'll get into that. Before we do, our conversation starter for today is have you listened to Semler's Preacher's Kid album?
I've listened to it like passingly a couple times. Not like, I don't know how much attention I paid to it, but I've listened to it a couple times.
Yeah. For anyone who doesn't know what in the world we're talking about, I can't remember. It was probably like the last 2 weeks ago, something like that. Semler, and I hope I'm pronouncing their name right.
Preacher.
Is this album called Preacher's Kid by the artist Semler, topped the Apple Music charts for Christian and gospel music, and it is a queer. It is the album of an openly queer person. It's like the first time that this has ever happened.
Yeah.
It's so crazy to think about. And I just thought, well, that definitely means we need to talk about at least some. Yeah, I was listening to it yesterday. I do have to say, it's not the kind of music I would personally normally listen to. It's probably a little bit more angst than I would normally do.
But to me, it's a little more folksy than I really listen to.
Yeah.
I am more the angsty music. We're the same age. I'm sure you remember when we were teenagers, a lot of like up and coming music for some reason was a lot of contemporary Christian rock. Mm-hmm. So that was my scene. I still listen to a lot of rock, metal, all that type of stuff. So, for me, the angsty part wasn't that bad, but it was very folksy, and that's not usually my thing, even though so many lesbians love it so much.
I definitely think that if this had come out when I was in high school, I totally would have had it on repeat. It totally would have been the album I wanted.
Right.
Because I think
totally that's
agree.
What her intention was too.
Yeah, probably, because thinking about the kind of Christian music I listened to in high school, it's almost like, this is what I always wanted. And I do have to say, there's one part of this album that made me laugh, and I need to read these lyrics because of just...
From the youth group track?
The youth group track. Yeah. Dear Lord. Okay,
it's the best
for anyone who... I'm just going to read this for anyone who doesn't know it. It's like... Youth group lock-ins are a really strange concept that youth group leaders seem to really like. It's like, let's take some repressed hormonal teenagers and put them in a church and hope they find Jesus overnight. Like, Jesus is a ghost hiding in the church, and if you stay long enough, you'll find him. But in my experience, the only thing you find is your sexuality.
And I think I put that on the messenger. I was like, when I was listening to that, I was thinking about it, and I was like, wait a second. I was like, my church used to do lock-ins. I mean, I don't remember youth group ever doing lock-ins. It was like, because then at that point you're teenagers, and they never did boys and girl things together ever. But we had what we called like Royal Rangers and Missionettes. So it was basically like scouts.
Okay.
And they would have lock-ins for us. So I remember the one I went to when I was 10 years old was when I figured out I had a crush on a girl.
Oh my God. See,
that was the night that caused me to question my sexuality the first time and then lock it away for 11 years.
Yeah. See, we did have lock-ins for youth group growing up.
My youth bashers weren't that crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy to think back to it. Like, a culture, like conservative Christian culture, which is so big on like boys and girls, like don't do this stuff. Yeah, let's lock everyone in this church building. And sure, we're going to be able to keep people apart. Like, yeah, I don't know. We even did one. I still remember one we did. And I always thought, this is where it was always ironic to be like the gay kid in the youth group. Because we did one where it was like it was this hip kind of lock-in thing where they like you fasted. It was, I don't know. It was like you fasted for it, but you were raising money in your fast for like sending meals to another place.
You fasted before the lock-in or during the
lock-in?
No,
during. It was
what we did with lock-ins, there was always lots of candy and games.
I know. Well, this was a different kind of one. It was like a thing where like you then camped in tents on the outside of the of the building. And they brought all of these youth groups together. It was like all of these youth groups. But the funny part is they had the boys' tents on one side.
Oh, like a retreat type thing almost.
Kind of, but like you're in the same area and it was only for one night.
Yeah.
And then the weird part is you like fasted the entire time. And then the thing that made it even more torturous is that by the end of it, when you're like the next day, when you're like really hungry, you're waiting to be able to go eat lunch. Then they did this whole entire thing where they gave you a list of things to go buy at the supermarket to then, like, you had to buy a certain amount of stuff for, like, for a family, of food for a family that they were going to give to a family in need. But you're going to the supermarket having not eaten for, like, 20 hours at this point. And you're like, I hate this. This is awful.
Yeah.
But the funny part is when they would split everyone up and they had a certain hour where like guys couldn't go over to the girls' like area of tents and girls couldn't come over to our area of tents. Sense. I was like, yeah. And I was just like, okay.
I don't want to go over there.
I don't want to go over there anyway.
Half you are here.
My half are here. Yeah, I think that the only other thing I'd say about the album is I definitely think it's showing the great divide, as I say, between the pulpit and lay people in what people are wanting to hear in Christianity. I think so many times, like, what we hear from pastors and all this stuff is, like, they're fear to talk about LGBTQ issues because, of the congregation, and all of this different kind of stuff. But it's showing that this is something that wants to be talked about. The LGBTQ experience in church. The very fact that we're hearing about this in like an album like this would top music charts of Christian music.
Yeah, I think I don't know if you've seen the video she did a while back. Her name is Grace Aldridge, by the way.
Okay.
The videos that she did, I know she did one with Jackie Hill Perry and I think Kevin Garcia was in it too, just about interviewing different types of people. But she did one about the Christian music industry. So I think she's a little younger than us, but she's about our age. Grew up in church, obviously, and everything. And she went in to interview people who were very involved in Christian contemporary music, like industry overall, that are no longer in it, either because of standing up for queer people or being queer
Yeah.
themselves or different things like that. And just talked about it. And one of the critiques she had, and whether or not her response to that was appropriate, I don't know, but that there was really no songs about, there were no praise songs, there were no songs praising God in her Christian album or whatever. And that was one of the things she talked about in that other video, that like Christian contemporary music, for the most part, there's like certain things that you have to say. And that was one of the things that, like, for example, Lecrae got in hot water over a few years ago, not only just because of he started talking about race, but just because the way his music started sounding. And they're like, you're not preaching the gospel with your music. No. And it's like, okay, is my music, who's my music for? Is it for you? Is it for someone else? And he's like, yeah, when I was a young rapper, I wanted to, talk about theology in every single song. But he's like, now he's like, I just want to make music. And that, so it's like, there's this whole divide almost now with like what Christian artists are and aren't allowed to
Talk about.
make art about, talk about, like, like what consists of a Christian album. Granted, there is a parental advisory on Semler's album, which is interesting to be on Christian charts too, because she does curse in
This
them.
is true.
And I have my own mixed feelings about that, but like you said, it's interesting to see like what pastors think that the congregation needs to hear and what a lot of the times we would also like to hear. And I think there needs to be a healthy balance of both.
Absolutely.
Of like the honesty and vulnerability that she has that you don't see in music.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, we do also have to say, like, obviously this is not a side B artist. Like, she's definitely affirming and...
Oh, yeah.
And
married and all.
Married and all. And, but it definitely just is a unique moment in history, in, like, this part of history.
Yeah.
Of queer faith. And so definitely something worth noting. Yeah. So, getting into the main topic for today. The potential power and harm of our stories. I'm very intrigued that this is the first topic that our patrons picked for us to talk about. I didn't think it was going to be this one, but I'm very intrigued. So with this, a lot of this whole conversation, I think, as I've been thinking about this, feels like it's very connected, obviously, to the culture and Christianity of testimonies and the power of testimonies, which can be connected to a general understanding of just stories. But I think there's something unique about the testimony culture in Christianity, especially evangelical Christianity. And I don't really know much of the history of where that comes from. But because it's far beyond the LGBTQ kind of situation. And I think obviously then it got picked up in the LGBTQ conversation by like ex-gay narrative, obviously where testimony became huge.
Oh yeah.
And I even would say, even in affirming like history, as you had people like Matt Vine and like some people that and Justin Lee, who their stories became some of the primary ways that they ended up explaining their point of view. It wasn't just theology. It wasn't just like, hey, let me tell you theology, but let me explain my story, and within that I'll tell you what my theology is. So I guess to kind of go off, like, what do you see as some of the potential risks of harm in the concept of testimonies? What do you think are some of the benefits and advantages in general? Maybe not just about ours, but like,
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you heard this growing up, but they would always talk about when you're giving testimonies, to try to give glory to God and not to the devil, type of thing. So it was always to be not focused so much on like, because basically in summary, a testimony is like, I was this and Jesus rescued me, and the I was this to be, like a fourth of it, and 3/4 of it is the Jesus rescued me part, and now I don't smoke anymore or something, so that's kind of the way it did it. And they didn't want you to focus on whatever the problem was or the thing that changed or whatever, because it was like talking more about what the enemy has done in your life as opposed to what God has done in your life. And that before and after, I think, is the slightly dangerous part in testimony giving, because like you said, it's not just telling a story, but it gave and gives this false impression that now everything is different or everything is better. And it's like, everything can be good and better to an extent, but that doesn't mean you don't deal with things. And that's the impression that it gives. It's like that now I don't deal with things. And I even remember when we were in Paraguay at one point, I had taken my I was doing my practical phase of my counseling ministry classes, and we were at this church, and a pastor that had invited us to give lectures on the need for counseling in your life was standing there telling us that real Christians didn't need counseling because Jesus fixed you when you took him into your heart. And I'm like, why'd you bring this here? Like, I'm confused. Like, fix the rest of them, but I'm good. And it's like, no, dude, you're not. And we could see so many things wrong. I mean, not to judge. We could see some stuff that was heading in the wrong direction with this guy. Like, you're about to crash and burn. And a few weeks later, we found out some crash and burn details, you know. So it was like, I don't want to be right about that, but we were right about that. Like, there are things that you have to pay attention to in your life, and just because Jesus is there doesn't mean that now everything is easy. Like, I even remember my parents got saved when I was a baby. They grew up Catholic, and then they got into the evangelical church when I was like a year old, less than a year old, somewhere around there. And so they were kind of really pushed. They were young. They were like 20 and 22, something like that. You know, they were really young. They got into the church. They got really involved. They almost immediately, they're like, yeah, you guys need to lead a cell group and this, that, and the other thing, and do this and do that. And my dad's like, I'm not ready to do this. And they're like, no, you're good, you know. And it was, I guess that's just how it was in the 90s. I don't know. And then years later, when a lot of stuff went really wrong, you know, there was infidelity in my family. My dad had drug issues, you know, all kind of stuff. And when, at one point, he's like, I feel like they tricked me. He's like, I feel like I was tricked. He's like, I thought stuff was going to be easy now. That's what they told me. That's what they told me. Like, everything was supposed to be okay now, and it's not. Everything's really hard. And that's kind of the danger I feel like there are in testimonies, because it's like, yes, God is this amazing thing. Jesus is everything. But you're being dishonest to an extent if you don't tell the whole story. And I feel like to an extent testimonies have become that. Let's tell part of the story. Let's tell the nice part of the story. And you don't tell the whole story. There's also the thing of like, I need it to be 5 minutes.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
You have 5 minutes. Go.
I went to a thing on sharing the gospel, like a workshop on sharing the gospel, and they talked about all the different ways. And there was a lot of great things.
Oh yeah.
And because I love doing gospel sharing in different settings and stuff. But then they got to the testimony part, and it's so sad because I love stories and I love testimonies and all that thing. They were like, we're gonna help you figure out how to do your elevator pitch of your testimony. And I was like,
that sounds bad.
That just sounds really bad. And then you had people coming up and being like, I was a liar, and now after Jesus I've learned to tell the truth. And I was like, what's happening? What are we doing?
Why are we selling used cars?
I know. There's just something about this before and after kind of concept that we have about like that somehow when you meet Jesus, your life instantaneously changes of some way, or even that it should change. Like, I don't know.
You know what? Another thing that's confusing for me, because I grew up in church. Like I said, my parents started going to church when I was a baby. So I accepted Christ when I was 2. And as much as people argue me about that I was too young and didn't understand everything, I remember that, so get off me. But I was like, I would always hear that, and I'm like, I was 2. My life didn't change. I mean, like, it's not that I wasn't potty trained before, and then I was. Like, there was like, what sin did I stop doing at 2 years old? No, I was terrified of the dark, and my parents explained to me that Jesus saves everybody, and so if I took Jesus into my heart, he would protect me at night, and so I was like, cool, let's do that, and I
Sounds
prayed.
Like a great solution.
Yeah, exactly. You're 2 years old. It's like, this fixes everything. Let's do that. And I was like, I prayed. I was the firstborn, so I could talk. Like, I had full conversations at 2 years old. You're surrounded by grown-ups. You learn to talk. It's like that or stuffed animals. And as you guys can see, I talk a lot. And I did, and I remember praying that prayer, and after that, I stopped having nightmares, I stopped having night terrors and everything. So for me, Jesus made himself very real in my life, but this before and after that I started hearing it growing up, I'm like, I don't have that.
Yeah.
What did God change in my life? Like, where's my before and after? Like, I got saved at 2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was confusing while I was growing up because I didn't have that, and I remember talking about that one time at a church, about how, like, don't fool yourself, we struggle with sin too. And this lady was like, yeah, she's like, my dad's a pastor, and I always wondered the same thing. Like, what's my magical, amazing testimony? Like, God did, and this people say this, God didn't pull me out of drugs. It was like a girl at a church camp I led, and she's like, I never killed myself before. And I'm like, obviously not, because you're standing here, but I get what you mean.
Yeah.
Like, all these church kids, they're like, what's my amazing testimony? What? They almost felt bad because God hadn't, like, taken them out of the dirt or something.
Yeah. It's... I think that kind of connects to another part of what I see as some of the danger in testimony concepts is I think they communicate an idea of prescription rather than description.
Yes.
And going, oh, like I have a story of recovering from alcoholism, and therefore if I share that, that means that every other person who has struggled with alcoholism, their story should match exactly like how mine is. And then that story gets weaponized in many ways in these situations. And I think that doesn't really happen in a lot of other areas. But I think when... in so many ways, whether it's a story of a married couple and how they've gone through everything about their marriage, or whatever, we begin to take it as a prescriptive way. Oh, so that's how it's supposed to be, or, in this situation. And I always remember people doing that with stories of queer people sharing their testimonies, or especially like ex-gay people, and being like, oh yeah, there you go, that's the story, and going, and then coming to me and being like, oh, but that and sharing these stories with me as if my life was supposed to be like theirs. And I was like, well, I'm sorry, it's not. It's not. My life is not like an ex-gay person. I'm very much gay, and I have gone through all of it. You cannot say I haven't, and my life is not going to be like theirs. But
okay,
yeah.
so I have a question though. When you were like in Exodus and everything, did you ever actually like say that or think that? It was like, yes, I am now ex-gay.
So yeah, that's a whole thing of what I think is so dangerous about the ex-gay narrative, is you're almost pushed to share about your story in those terms, even when the term, it's almost like a believe it till it's real kind of thing. Like,
fake it till you make it. Yeah.
Fake it till you make it. 'Cause you were told to be like, I'm no longer gay. I used to do all of this, and now God is like saving me from homosexuality. Such like very obscure terms. And you're like, but then to other people, like especially to straight people, when you would share that way, they'd be like, oh my gosh, you're straight now. When in your mind, it was like, no, I'm still attracted to men, but I'm communicating this because that's the route I think I'm going, So
Yeah.
I definitely began after a while creating a testimony in some ways that fit the ex-gay narrative, of what it kind of I felt like I was supposed to look like, even though in my own head, and I mean this was even in high school, you know, like where you'd go to a camp or a conference, and you would kind of create this narrative because that's how it was supposed to be, even though I felt like this is actually not a good description of my actual
Not very accurate.
It's not very accurate, but yet somehow you felt I at least I felt like this is what I'm supposed to do, you know.
Say it in faith, declare it, all that.
Yeah, exactly. And then you realize like, no, this is not real. This is not working. This is not helpful. And I think that has gotten me even just a little bit wary in general of storytelling and testimonies. And I know that some of that's wrong. Some of it has been a process of having to redeem that, of going like, God does work through stories. He does show, like, if he didn't work through stories, we wouldn't have so much narrative in the Bible. So much of it is this.
The Old Testament is almost all narrative.
Like we have the entire life of Jesus, 4 different accounts of it. But I think that for me was actually a very, very big redeeming moment after going through the ex-gay process and then like stepping away from that and then kind of going to the other extreme of like, no, I don't want anything to do with stories or anything like that. That it just reeked like ex-gayness. Like honestly, even when I would read like affirming literature, like Justin Lee's story, like thing where he told this story, I just didn't like. Yeah, Torn. I didn't like the whole story
telling
process.
my story is like a thesis I'm proving.
Yeah, like, and I was like, my story's screwed up. It doesn't fit anyone's narrative. So I was like, no,
it's not polished, and testimonies are given as polished.
Exactly. And I think what was actually very helpful for me in redeeming stories was looking at, I can't remember who told me about it, but like, if you look at Jesus's life, you have the very same story told 4 different ways. Mm-hmm. And it shows that there's not necessarily one way of telling a story.
Yep.
Or your life.
It's all told from different perspectives. Yeah.
It's all told from different perspectives. And those 4 perspectives of the Gospels, none of them are any less true.
Yeah.
But they're all explaining some truth about what happened in Jesus' life. And I think for me, that gave me a little bit of hope of just kind of the rawness of stories in that way. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that or any thoughts.
On what? You ask such broad questions sometimes.
I do. Okay, well then let's go into a little bit more of the focused side of this. You know, we've talked about when you are dealing with your story, when you're dealing with your life, explaining, people ask you about your life, you know, especially being in a mixed orientation marriage. How do you normally handle that? Do you ever see harm in sharing your story? What have you had any experience of like seeing a lot of blessing out of your story? What has been your experience with all that?
One, because like I said, in my everyday life, even though I podcast about this, I don't talk about my sexuality much. It's not that big part of my life. It's not this huge thing, but I have had people in the Side B group, especially women. A lot of times they ask me about the marriage aspect. They're like, how did this work? A lot of times the women who are in relationship with men, what do you think? Is it worth pursuing? Do I keep going with this? And I'm like, I don't know, bro. Like, that's your relationship. I'm not in it. I couldn't tell you. I'm like, I can tell you where. And that's kind of like where I've learned to kind of like step back from like, I did this and it worked for me. Go do it. I've been like, look, this is where I was at. These are the thoughts I had. This is where I had to go with this. So I think that's where I've had to talk about it, is being like, marriage is not for everyone, gay or straight. They're like, should I pursue marriage with a guy? I'm like, do you love him? Start there.
That would be an important first question.
Not just, it's a dude. I'm like, I understand that that's one of our bases in, you know, the traditional sexual ethic. Use a woman, that's a dude. That's like that makes it okay. That means you can. Doesn't mean you should or you have to. Like, and just because you're in a relationship with them already doesn't mean you're obligated to continue in it. Like, if it's a bad relationship, leave. If it's questions about your sexuality, that's kind of something you have to work through yourself. I kind of had to work through mine already married, so there's that. I wasn't actually, like, I think when I came out to myself will be 10 years this year in a couple months. I was engaged at the time, and I'm like, hey, honey, I was bisexual when I was a teenager. Speaking of testimonies. And he's like, his question was, he's like, but you like me, right? I'm like, yeah. He's like, then what? You know, his question was the same thing I had in my head. Then why is this important?
Yeah.
It's like, I'm just telling you. At the time, I had no parameters for this. I had no way of thinking about it. That was just all I had. You know, so it was, and I thought, since I thought it was a has-been thing, it was a was thing. It doesn't matter. And I got married and everything, and I did, and I do love him. So I was like, yeah, let's go with this. But I didn't realize how much my sexuality would affect that, because that was the first guy I had ever been in a relationship with also. Like, so that's also a big thing. You realize how sheltered I really was. Not allowed to date and all that. But it was once I was actually married that I had to process some things. So when people have asked me, I think that's been the part that I've really talked about, has been the part about the marriage thing. And then I was talking to someone else years ago, I was talking to someone in a celibate partnership. I was like, look, once people found out about my sexuality, I've done the thing. I got married. Like, I'm a missionary. And they still sometimes will be like, maybe you should do this differently, trying to make me more something else. It's like, no matter what you do, it's always going to be this way. You know, it's like I sent it in the group text. I checked. I was like, I can check off all the identity markers now. Like, like born again, mother, wife, missionary. Like, I got them all.
Got them all.
But it's like, it's just, I think with testimonies, I more like see it like, what's the situation? Who's asking? Why are they asking? What are they asking? I think, like you were saying, that like sometimes testimonies are shared like, I did this, so you should do it too. I think people who give their own testimonies are more like, this is what happened to me, so there's hope for you. But I don't think people giving it are as prescriptive as, like, many times the pastors or leaders are like, look, this person did it, you should too. As I think most of the time people who give their own testimonies are more just trying to just saying like, this is possible, as opposed to being prescriptive about it. And that's kind of one thing I worry about. Like, it's like, I don't know if I should mention her, but Jackie Hill Perry, I remember when I was dealing with this, like, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, I came across her testimony and the way she was when she was like 19, and the way she talked about it and everything. And I feel like to a certain extent her testimony was launched and everybody was like, talk about this, I mean, she was a poet, she did bring it up herself, but I think a certain narrative was thrown on her while she was still in the middle of processing things. And now that she's become a little more in control of her own narrative, she actually tells it slightly differently than she did when she was 19 years old.
Yeah.
Because that's another thing people forget. It's like when you're in a youth group or you're being mentored or pastored, when you're that young, sometimes, you say things differently than you would when you're 30.
It's true. And I think then sometimes you also learn more about your story. You gain more perspective with time. Yep.
Because when you said it, when you were 19 and you said it, you believed it.
You did. And some of it may be true. Like, for instance, anyone who's listened to any of our patrons who've listened to one of the bonus episodes from last year that I did with Michelle knows about what I'm about to say. But I have gone back and forth about taking out episode 3 of season 1, where Michelle and I talk about kind of my introduction. That it's kind of been referred to by many people who listen as like my story episode, when it was really just meant to be people that said, hey, you're doing this podcast, you should kind of give an introduction to yourself so then people know like who they're listening to. And so
Why
that's
do you want to
where
take it out?
so I'm not going to, but I did process for a little bit of thinking of taking it out because last year in October I went on a road trip, which many people know because I did some recordings during it. And while I was on that road trip, I got to see some people who went through conversion therapy with me that I haven't seen in years. None of them are none of them are gay anymore. Most of them are either non-Christian or side A.
Okay.
But I got to see them because we were always great. Like we were good friends and all of this stuff. And it was really healing for me to talk with them about processing some of the things about our story since then and how like I went through periods of, as I've said, I've gone through 8 different periods of conversion therapy, but mixed in that were these times of go like either leaving faith or going out and sleeping around or like all these different kind of stuff because there's this narrative that's put into conversion therapy that you can either be Christian, which means trying to become straight, or you go live the gay lifestyle, which is drugs and sex, and you don't, not even a relationship you get into is just about the sex because there's no love in it. It's just about drugs and sex. And so when you're a kid and that's the only narrative you're told, and after you try to become straight and then that doesn't work, you go, well, I'm going to go live the gay lifestyle because that's my only other option. And then you go out and you sleep around and you do drugs and you realize, well, this isn't healthy. So the ex-gay people must be right. So then you go back over into the ex-gay world and then you do all that again and you realize, well, this doesn't work. Well, I guess I should go do the gay lifestyle again, quote unquote. And it turns into this like pendulum swing. And I never had a concept of that really, honestly, this pendulum swing until late last year to the point where I ended up going through counseling about it. And I was like,
really?
Yeah, and I think this is actually a result of the testimony situation because as I was in it as a kid, everything gets sorted through this testimony time when I would go out and I would sleep with guys and I would come back. It was all put into testimony format. You were this way and now you're back and you're doing this. And that's literally how my brain had come to organize it. And if you listen...
But another reason I think you're going to like that Chambers book.
I need to read his book, yes.
Because he talked about that very thing when he was, like, really young.
Mm-hmm. It's called, what, My Exodus? Alan Chambers' book, My Exodus. I need to read it. So for me, when I listen to episode 3, I go back and I'm like, oh, wow, that for where I was at that moment, that's so true of what my story was. But now I would totally explain my experience very, very differently. And I don't think that either of those are necessarily wrong, but I've gained more perspective now. And I think that's why, like, for me, I become so cautious about talking about my experience in Christian settings because a lot of times I think in my situation, people want to harp on this thing of, oh, you used to be in an affirming relationship and now you're not, and now you're celibate. Mm-hmm. And they want to harp on that. Like, I want to be able to share about my experience in order to make space for LGBTQ people in the church.
Yeah.
Like, that's what I want to. But then I sometimes fear that then my story can sometimes be weaponized by Christians against affirming people to say, oh, well, Josh did this, so you need to do this kind of thing. Like, Josh left this relationship, you should leave this relationship kind of thing. And it can become this very thing that I never intended it to be. And so I've always been looking for, how can I share my experience in a way to say, listen, my experience can show that we need a space for LGBTQ people in the church. And I think some of the ways I've started to do that is, depending on who I'm around, I'll try to tell my story in a way that doesn't fit their narrative.
Oh, okay.
And it just depends. Like, for when I'm around conservative people, I'll emphasize more of the part of like surviving conversion therapy rather than about leaving my,
Yeah.
my ex.
Your ex.
Um, and even around other LGBTQ people, I might even
You don't tell them the part they want to hear.
Exactly. I try not, and this is not just around Christians. It's really around anyone. I really try not to tell people this part of my story that they want to hear, that it fits their paradigm. And that's been kind of something new I've started doing, but I don't know. So, what do you think are some? I guess we've talked a lot about some of the bad ways, like
Bad
that. Like, what do you see as some of the good things that can come out of us sharing our experiences as LGBTQ people in the church?
I think, in the sense of, even like I started saying, like I said, it's really to give glory to God and to Jesus, because it's almost like saying, it's like, okay, so much bad comes from testimonies. Like when Jesus was healing, I'm sure everyone expected to be healed, and there were people who weren't healed. That doesn't mean you don't tell them that Jesus healed people.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm talking about like physical healing, like, he healed lepers and blind people and brought the dead back to life, all that. He didn't bring everybody's dead cousin back to life, but that doesn't mean you didn't tell people about it.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the time, for many years, the part of my testimony that I would, tell, because like I said, I don't talk about my sexuality a lot, was what God did in my life with depression. And it was really bad when I was a teenager. And that's really, like, I would even almost say the bigger part of my story. Like, as bad as things got, and I came out still loving Jesus. Like, even in Semler's album, it was as many things that people might say. It's like, she's still, the part where she says, she's like, she still hangs on to the Savior, no matter what people have told her about him and what he thinks about her. And I remember one time somebody told me that, and I don't remember what part of my story I was talking about. They're like, when you talk about your life, we can just tell how much you love Jesus and that he's really done something for you. Like, that's just something that you hang on to. And I think that's what our testimony should tell. No matter where we are or what the story contains, of just the fact that, like, the constant, the good, what you should be getting out of this is not me at all, but Jesus and what God has done in my life in all of it. If people come out of your testimony remembering more about you and less about Jesus, then whose story are you really telling in the first place? It's like, with what purpose are you doing it with? Obviously, they're going to remember our stories, but are they going to remember, like, how much I white-knuckled it and how much I did this and didn't do that, and how much I was able to hang on and resist temptation? Or, like, I wanted to die, and Jesus made me believe that life was worth living. For whatever reason may have been that you were in that place, Jesus was still there in the darkness with you. It's just different ways of telling, like you said, just telling different ways of telling the same story, almost kind of just like the Gospels. The disciples all witnessed the exact same things, and they all told them different ways, because one was sitting over there and one was sitting over there, and they just saw different things, and different things were important to them. And our testimonies, I think, should be the same.
That's really impactful what you're saying about, like, if people come out of hearing your story and learn more about you than Jesus, then that needs to be a red flag in many ways.
And, like, it's odd almost to an extent, because me and my husband, like I said, we worked a lot with teenagers and summer camps and stuff like that, and we used to teach. They always want us to teach about married, because we were the young married couple and all this, and we would always what we would try to do is the thing to tell them: your teenagers, don't rush into relationships. You don't need to think about it, pray about it, stuff like that. But then as time went on, more like when we were kind of getting out of that, like, we need to continue to say that, but we need to add other things that, like, we saw a friend of ours who's just, many times as he has tried, has not found the right one. He's just, and my husband is like, maybe he's not meant to get married, stuff like that. And And I honestly love Peter Valk's thing because he's always pushing, like, we need to tell teenagers this. You know, so it's like we've always also trying to say, it's like we might be married. We got married very young. I got married when I was 21. But that doesn't mean that that's what you have to do. That doesn't mean that that's going to be your story. That doesn't mean anything about you at all. And it's odd that I, as a married person, want to talk so much about singleness in an odd way. Like, I really felt when Rachel Gilson felt like, this is the chapter I feel odd writing about.
Yeah. I think one of the greatest benefits I see also in this is when we share our stories, people, like, topics become humanized in many ways. Yeah. I think that's why one of the biggest things you'll see is the greatest thing that changes a person's views on LGBTQ issues is when they actually finally know someone in their life who is LGBTQ. I think that shows one of the reasons why.
I've heard that be criticized as well. It's
really?
Odd.
Well,
yes.
It may be wrong, but it may not be the main thing, and so I have no research to back this up. So, internet.
No. What I've heard it criticized, I'm bagging on that view, is they saying that, like, we're distancing ourselves from the sola scriptura view, and we're going on the whatever the other one is that I can't remember right now. Sola experiencia, something like that. Like, we're going from something based in the word, and the more LGBT people we get to know, the more compassionate we get on this, and being like, we're getting soft on sin because we see people suffering, and like, that's a bad thing. And it's like, okay.
It's like, I think what it is it's that you see these are humans. Like, this is an actual experience, you know? Like, I remember working with a group of pastors who were trying to figure out what, like, their church's stance was going to be on LGBTQ issues. And I remember standing with pastors and like, I know I'm probably going to offend y'all saying this, but I'm going to say it anyway. The decisions you're making literally don't affect your lives, but they affect other people's lives. So please remember the people who are going to be affected by the decisions you make, because if you're all straight, you know, like, I think that there's just something so powerful. And I think that for a lot of LGBTQ people that might be in their community and don't know a lot about, like, they may not have all the details of what does LGBT inclusion look like in the church and how can my church help. All they have is their story. All they have is their experience. And many goes, well, that's what I can start with. And I think that that's something great. I think as long as we come from it, from an understanding of, first of all, as you said, and I think it's so important that our stories must make Jesus the hero over ourselves, that they must highlight him above us and his kingdom, not our own kingdom. Like, that needs to be the main focus. And the second of all, as long as we are having the humility in our stories that my story is my story and this is my experience, and I can't speak for every LGBTQ person on earth, nor every person on earth with whatever topic I'm talking about, you know, I can't do that, but I can share with you what has been my experience in that way and how Jesus has showed up for me in this, in all of it. So I think that there are benefits in that.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons, like, I like Rachel Gilson and Lori Krieg. I do like the way that they approach that in their lives as well, because they're also both married women who experience same-sex attraction, and that's how they describe themselves. Neither of them use LGBT language to describe themselves, and they explain why, and they tell people and everything. But they're also very much so, but that's me. You do you. I have my reasons. I think, you know, to an extent, when you do something, it's because you believe you're right. You know, it's not.
Of course.
You know, so they say that, you know, these are my reasons. These are why I think I'm correct. But humble enough to recognize that I could be wrong, but this is me and this is what I'm doing. You do you. And I think that's one of the reasons why, to an extent, side B people don't get along a lot with people who like to use same-sex language to an extent, but the reason usually being because people who use same-sex attracted language many times try to be very prescriptive of like, this is why I do it and this is why you should do it too, but they don't do that. You know, they don't use LGBT language, but they have no problem with anyone else using it, and they're very conscious of like, I'm married, but that's not for everybody, like we know that. Don't, you know, they're very conscious with their stories and what they represent and how they could be used, and they try to avoid that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. I again, yeah, it's that whole prescriptive thing. When I try to take my experience and say this is prescriptive of what you have to do and how Jesus is going to work in your life, then I am taking on a very high authority that I'm not really sure I have. I'm sure I don't have in people's lives when that is. I think that there's something so amazing. I was actually talking to someone yesterday about this, how I really feel like you look in Scripture and you see sometimes Jesus, or just God, like in the Old Testament and the New Testament, many times we get this idea of we know how God's going to work. We know how God is going to do things. And then suddenly God goes, nope, watch. And then he does something completely different.
Right.
Like one of the words that has been given to my adopted mom in Colombia this past for 2021 has been the verse in Isaiah about I'm doing a new thing. And she's just been so I'm going to speak to all my evangelical charismatic people out there, and I'm sorry to everyone else. Like my adopted mom, she's like prophetic and she's amazing, and whenever she says something, I'm like, I will listen. Y'all.
Yeah.
But anyway, she was talking about how this word has come to her about God doing a new thing. But it was just interesting for me to think about how God said that in Isaiah. God saying in Isaiah, I'm doing a new thing. And how many times he says that when we get into this understanding of like, this is how God's going to work in people's lives. And then God comes onto the scene like, no, I'm doing a new thing. And in this person's life, I'm going to do this. And in this person's life, I'm going to do that. And I think you even see this in like many times you'll see people in Jesus's like encounters with people that he'll encounter people with similar like contexts like of their life or like similar circumstances, and he'll engage them in two completely different ways.
Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know if you've heard the example before, but when I think one of the more common miracles that Jesus did or that are talked about or given in detail is the healing of the blind.
Yeah.
And he never did it the same way.
No, he never goes about the same way.
Other odd thing.
You ever
unnecessary thing.
You ever wonder if Jesus just kind of thought and they're like, which way can I think of now? Let's do this. Let's use mud. Why not? Let's do it. And spit.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's interesting like how you just in all of them, in the way that he engaged with each of his disciples, he called each of them very differently. The way that he encountered the woman at the well, the way he encountered with all of this. And so I think that there's something refreshing in that, to know that God is going to encounter each of us very uniquely. And I think that that's also something for us to keep in mind when we hear other people's stories. Mm-hmm. That, like, I've enjoyed Washed and Waiting. I've enjoyed, like, Single Gay Christian. And all three of, like, Greg Coles, Wesley Hill, and I are all celibate, white gay men. And yet, they're, like, I've enjoyed them. There's a lot that I don't connect with in their stories. Right. There's just not. And that's because God's worked very differently in my life.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I've said a lot is that the scripture says that God came that we would have life and have life abundantly. And abundant life may look different for you than it looks like for me.
Yeah.
God doesn't give abundance in the same way because he doesn't count abundance in the same way that we do. Mm-hmm. He's like, I know what's going to make you satisfied. I know what's going to make you what you need in your life. not necessarily the things that you think you need or you think that you should be there. And this Christian checklist that we have, he doesn't give a flying flip about, you know, of the things that you need to be a happy little Christian. It's like, no, I know what you need in life and what your life abundantly looks like. I know because I made you.
Yeah.
You know? And people want to be like, no, abundant Christian life looks like this because this is what my abundant Christian life looks like. This is what has brought me happiness and joy and peace. And it's like, yeah, but some of that don't bring me no peace at all that you have. It brings peace to you, but I don't want it.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's like the odd thing that was told beforehand before to many times Christian. I think it was told more to queer women. I don't know about men. I mean, not one, but what was many times told me, like, you'll find the right guy one day. And it's like, gay women are like, but I don't want one.
Yeah. I was actually this is a little bit, I know we're wrapping up, but this is a little bit of a tangent connected to that. And I want us to sometime, y'all, if you female co-hosts want to do a topic, like an episode on this, I would totally be up for listening. But I run an LGBTQ university student group. We met last night. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about how, and I think Sarah's brought this up on the podcast at some point. Anyway, but how for so long female sexuality has been completely simply understood in connection to men. Like, there's been no understanding of female sexuality apart from a man. Whereas, like, in the understanding of it, even at least celibacy, male sexuality has been able to be understood in a way apart from women. Jesus, for example. And so, yeah, for like, I mean, I think that we as gay men definitely still get that. You'll find the right woman. And I'm like, no, I don't need one. But anyway, I'm very intrigued still by that, about the female experience with this.
Well, because it's societal norms of that woman needs a man to get so far in society. And while most men want a woman, they don't need one.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely.
So that's a whole other thing.
That's a whole... We need to... Yeah, that'll be another topic episode. Yeah, we have so many more topics to get to on this podcast. Great. All right. Well, this has been good. I'm so glad you're back, Ashley.
Same. I did miss it. And you guys needed me because on the Christmas episode, you said you didn't know Kristen Stewart was gay.
Did I say... Yeah,
You did say that.
Okay, yeah.
And I'm like, sometimes just the knowledge of the women's queer side of the universe, you're just so unknowledgeable about. You need me.
We do need
Mary's
you.
gone. I'm what you have left.
Well, I thought she was straight.
It's been public, well-known knowledge for a while. Even before she said it herself on TV, people knew before that.
I just, like, so... I don't know, like, Miley Cyrus, some of these people,
She dated the guy from Twilight, but that was it.
Yeah, Kristen Stewart, oh my gosh, people who love Kristen Stewart are going to be so mad at me. Kristen Stewart is so bland, I have no desire to know more about her.
And that is every male's opinion, apparently gay or straight, of her. Whereas queer women, when we were 15, that was a lot.
I'm sure.
It was like, we didn't. Why do you think queer women watched Twilight? The movie was terrible. It was garbage.
Oh, I've never watched
Anybody
it.
who actually likes Twilight, it's garbage. Don't watch it.
Oh yeah.
And even the dude who's like, me and my brothers and now we've seen movies with that guy in it. We're like, that poor man almost destroyed his career making that movie because he's actually a good actor and he had to do that.
Yeah.
And Kristen Stewart, maybe she's not the best actress, but it was always like young women, because she's like our age, we was like, she was fine. Like when we were 15, it was like you watched that movie for one reason only, and it wasn't these weird sexy vampire scenes. Like none of that.
Werewolves.
No, not really. No. I mean, queer women weren't interested in that, but they definitely watched that movie. You know, and then like I said, it was she had girlfriends for years, and I think every little gay woman that had a crush on her when they were 12 were like, yay! Yeah. And that was like back in like, I don't know, it was a while ago. She came out when Trump became president, somewhere around there, like on SNL.
Okay.
Like publicly. But people had been knowing she was dating women for years.
Yeah. I know, that's like,
So when you said that, I'm like, oh my God.
I know that was yeah, I mean, I think that happens a lot of times with actors and actresses. Like, for instance, I can't remember who the actor is who plays Jack on Will and Grace.
Uh-huh.
And I was introducing that to a Gaby. I was introducing them to Will and Grace. And I explained to them...
Some classics.
Oh, yeah. I was explaining to them the actor who plays Jack didn't come out until, like, very late in the show. Like, he didn't come out as a gay man in real life until, I think, like, almost the second to last season or something. And they were like, what? And I'm like, yeah, everyone knew he was gay. It was very obvious because he only ever played in queer films or queer television shows, and just, it was known. But it was
The
like...
skinny guy, right?
Yeah, the skinny guy.
Yeah.
And, well, they're both pretty skinny. But yeah, like the
I know what you're talking
sidekick.
about. Yeah.
But I think that's definitely... I think you see it less now, but that was like a very big thing in the 90s and the early 2000s of queer actors who everyone knew were
Don't
queer.
ask, don't tell.
But it just was never talked about until later on, and people
Right.
were like, wow, so amazing. Anyway, but I didn't know about Kristen Stewart. That's why we need you, and we're so glad you're back. Anyway, all right. Well, thank you everyone for listening. Thank you to patrons who voted on this topic. We'll start the next vote on the next patron topic.
I hope we did your choice justice.
We hope so. Please let us know what you thought. And we hope it was helpful. Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll talk to you in the next episode. Bye everyone.